Hello, everyone. Welcome back to OpenLine. We are talking about a push to reverse history and restore large areas of open grasslands all across the Southeast and certainly here in Tennessee. We have with us the executive director of the Southeastern Grassland Initiative and the co-founder and chief ecologist with the Southeastern Grassland Initiative. Dwayne Estes, Theo Witsell, both here via Zoom. And as we kind of, I guess as we were going to break, the history of this, when I talk about reversing history, this is why these grasslands, they played such an important role in our history, even to the point of how Nashville got here, right? And many cities got here. Is that right, Dwayne?
Absolutely. Yeah, that you nailed it. I mean, we can really trace the founding of Nashville back in 1779, 1780, when James Robertson came here in 1779, and John Donaldson came shortly thereafter in the early winter of 1780. The reason that they came here and founded what will become Fort Nashboro was, they were coming in pursuit of land, right, from East Tennessee. They lived up around Northeast Tennessee. But the reasons they came here kind of go back even into the 1760s, maybe up to 20 years before they came. And it was largely because, if you step back into the 1750s and 1760s, this was all absolute, frontier wilderness. Now, there were Native American tribes who called this region their hunting ground, and that's a very important thing to acknowledge. The Shawnee Nation, especially, was to the north, the Chickasaws to the west, the Creeks to the south, and the Cherokees to the east. But here in Nashville proper, there were no permanent Native American settlements as of the 1760s and 1770s. And so back over to the east, you had these hunters, these long hunters, as they were called, people like Daniel Boone and Casper Mansker. For our viewers up in Sumner County, they've probably seen Mansker Creek and Mansker Station. Well, Mansker was an early hunter, and people like Thomas Bigfoot Spencer, who lived in a giant sycamore tree up around sort of the Goodlettsville area back in the 1760s and 1770s. These hunters came hundreds of miles to come here to Middle Tennessee and parts of Kentucky because of these open meadowlands, which had limestone real near the surface. And they were natural places for buffalo and bison to come, and elk, and they would lick and paw the soil and get all the nutrients. And all the grazing that those buffalo and elk did in the vicinity also helped to keep these open meadowlands vibrant and diverse. And so when those first hunters like Daniel Boone and Mansker and others came here, they would go back to East Tennessee after a couple years, or back to North Carolina and Southwest Virginia, and they would tell stories of what Middle Tennessee was like, almost like stories of the Promised Land. And they were almost heralded as sort of like stars of their day. People would wait for their return to talk about all the things they had seen across the Appalachian Mountains. And so basically they began to fuel this passion, this drive for other settlers who wanted to push westward across through the Cumberland Gap, through Kentucky. And as they made this westward migration in the 1779, 1780 period, they even acknowledged they crossed these great grassland landscapes, like up to the north of Nashville, a place called the Barrens. If you still look around the Manchester-Tullahoma area, you'll see the term the Barrens still on modern day maps, which is a holdover from 200 years ago when these areas were covered in grassland. So again, I think we can credit Nashville's original founding is really due to these settlers coming in pursuit of game, in pursuit of already open landscapes, because it was already conducive to, open areas were conducive to having your cattle already have pastures to graze. It was easier to put in a crop field if the area was already open. It required much less intensity than if this area were densely forested, which we know from historical evidence it was not densely forested.
Fascinating. All right, and Theo, you were talking earlier about ancient prairie remnants, and that's where you go to find how to kind of build these larger areas. So when I hear that, it makes me think, well, they must be pretty small, and it would stand to reason that they've been destroyed, they've been built over, whatever. What is there an example of the largest remnant? What is the largest remaining natural prairie land that you think would be most indicative of what we would have seen back when Nashville was founded? Where would that be across the Southeast?
Well, across the Southeast, there are some large grasslands remaining. Down in Florida, for example, the Florida dry prairie, a lot of that is ranch land, but it's still in native condition. As you get further west, you typically find that's unusual to be that far east and have large remnants. Mostly the larger remnants are in the western part of our region, and our region goes all the way to sort of east central Texas up through eastern Oklahoma. And it, you asked earlier sort of what is the Southeast in terms of what we're talking about. And we say it's the biogeographic Southeast, which is kind of a big word, but it just means the area where the southeastern flora and fauna is sort of a major player. And that goes everywhere up to the line of the glacial maximum where the glaciers came the furthest south. And then all the way down, of course, to the Atlantic and Gulf Coast and over to that sort of dry line that happens somewhere over in eastern central Texas. So we have parts of 24 states in our Southeastern Grasslands focal region. And it's in the western part where we find the largest remnants. And that's a function of how long that area has been settled. So we think about sort of Euro-American settlement starting on the Atlantic coast and working its way west over hundreds of years. We see the first loss of grasslands was on the eastern seaboard, and it's worked its way across to the west over time. So in the east, you typically find the smallest scraps of remaining original sort of that ancient prairie grassland. In some cases, it's really 100% gone. We have certain areas of grassland where there's really no remnants left, unfortunately. But as you go west, and as you get west of the Mississippi River in particular, you might find some big areas. The largest remnant grassland probably in Tennessee, as far as prairie, the truly open treeless grassland, would probably be on Fort Campbell. Would you agree, Dwayne?
That's right. It's about 25,000 acres of prairie savanna habitat. It's located sort of in the impact zone in Fort Campbell. Across base, it's about 25,000 acres. But even at that large of a scale, that particular prairie ecosystem, 99% of that whole prairie across southern Kentucky, western Kentucky has been lost. I mean, it sounds like a lot when you say, well, there's 25,000. That still represents a fraction of 1% of what existed up until about 1800.
And if it's on Fort Campbell, a normal person couldn't go see it, right? I mean, is that right or not? Am I right about that?
Well, I mean, mostly true, right? But that's actually one of the reasons why it still exists. And I think we should give credit to the Department of Defense because, across the Southeast, we see some of the best grasslands that remain are actually on military installations. Avon Park Air Force Base, Theo mentioned the big prairie in Florida, which is 55,000 acres. That's the biggest contiguous grassland left in the eastern United States. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, extensive tens of thousands of acres of savanna. Eglin Air Force Base, Florida, tens of thousands of acres.
Fort Chaffee in Arkansas, similar story, tens of thousands of acres.
Here in Tennessee, I would say the two biggest areas with the best remaining grasslands are either going to be Arnold Air Force Base in Coffee County or Fort Campbell in Clarksville area.
Wow.
Another spectacular Tennessee remnant is a site called May Prairie Natural Area, which is down in Manchester. And that is the highest quality, certainly, remnant of the barrens that Dwayne was talking about down there around Tullahoma, Manchester area. Just a spectacular area. Has something like 50 plus species on the state rare plant list. It's the only site in the state for some really rare plant species that have been in that grassland for thousands of years.
And so that's fascinating to hear where those are. And now, you said earlier you're working with places like Google, right? So Google gave you, I think you said 50 acres. Is that what you said? So that's good. Where are some other areas right around us? What about in Middle Tennessee? Are there some other areas that you're hoping to really restore and turn into what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, for us, partnerships are real key. Our organization started at the beginning of 2018, so we're about 5 years old. And, for much of our first couple of years, it was about spreading the word and what we call prairie preaching, if you want to call it that, preaching the gospel of the prairie. And but we had to sort of reverse the myth of the squirrel in order to make headway and gain ground and sort of grow our reputation as leaders in the field of conservation, which I think we've done over the past 5 years. But we also realize that we need to partner with a wide variety of partners. So we partner with federal and state agencies. Most of the ones you can name, we partner with. We partner as well with a number of nonprofits, the Nature Conservancy of Tennessee, 10 Green Land Conservancy as well. But also corporate partners like Google are very important. So we've got a number of these kinds of partnerships. Now, naturally, most of our early projects have grown out of the Clarksville area because our headquarters is based at Austin Peay State University. But, we really are now excited. We've got a brand new project, for example, up on the Cumberland Plateau with 10 Green Land Conservancy, where we're looking at restoring almost 400 acres over in Ray County. It's a little bit east of probably this main audience, but just to the east of Crossville. That's 400 acres. That's a big chunk of savanna. And we are using that model that's been proposed for Bridgestone and that has been proven up near Crossville at Catoosa Wildlife Management Area that's very successful. Otherwise, in Middle Tennessee, we accomplish a lot through a lot of small scale sites that otherwise might get overlooked. We're working hard to advocate on behalf of those. And some of those are really tiny. I mean, they're, maybe 2 acres. It's all that's left of a particular type. And so I think that's where the last thing I would say to that is a lot of these that are in Middle Tennessee are on private property. And so we've been working on some great strategies we're happy to tell you about, particularly with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service and organizations like Quail Forever and the American Bird Conservancy to really begin to work with private landowners, private farmers. And then also with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we've got some great opportunities to work with private farmers as well. So I think that's a big angle for us here in Middle Tennessee is not so much, we obviously are working on public lands, but really it's growing our footprint and working with private landowners as well.
Fascinating. All right, we'll take a break. Come back, continue the discussion. If you want to call in, there's the number 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.